Hey guys, Pinball Pimp here. I'm going to show you the easiest way to use my stencils so you get the perfect paint job every time. Okay, when you receive my stencils, usually there's some excess around the edges that I haven't trimmed yet. So when it comes to you, the best thing to do is get an X-Acto knife or a scissors and trim all the excess material all the way to the edge of the stencil. That way it's easier for you to line up the corners. So with this stencil already trimmed, what I'm going to do is line up the corners with my fingers kind of locked on the edges of the cabinet here, and you get it squared up right where you want to be. Now remember that the first color, when you have X's on the first stencil, that dictates where the second stencil lines up. So you got to be very careful to get your first stencil where you want it to be, because you don't have any room to move your second stencil if it's something that has traps and bleeds, and that's why the X is there for the registration system. So once the stencil is in place where you want it, I usually get a couple weights, whether it be a can, just something heavy. You just don't want your stencil to slip when you fold this back to start the hinge. So the first thing I do, I go to a corner and I'm going to pull the backing off. First thing I want to do is actually kind of make sure this is burnished down so it didn't release a little bit during shipment. I'm going to pull the back off and I'm going to reveal about a 2 to 3 inch area, which I call the hinge. So once this is burnished down onto the cabinet, none of it will move for the rest of the stencil install. So after this is folded back, I get my scissors and I cut off a little bit of the backing. Now I fold this back and I burnish it down to the edge. Back and forth motions. Once that's done, your stencil is locked into place and it's not going to move on you anymore. So now I go ahead and burnish the entire cabinet to make sure that the stencil itself is stuck to the top transfer tape. And once you're done with this, you're going to fold the entire stencil back so you can get under the edge of the backing. Now this is where you want to peel very slowly, because you don't want any of the points of the stencil starting to tear as you peel back. If they do, you just set it back down, burnish over top of it again, and eventually you'll get it to stick. But just go very, very slowly. And once I get about halfway to where I can actually hold the backing with my thumb and forefinger, you hover the stencil with a little tension, and you just go back and forth, about 1 inch at a time. And you burnish the stencil into place. When I get about halfway, I fold it back, grab my scissors, and cut off any of this excess material. Then I basically do the same thing. Just go halfway again, till you can grab the backing with your thumb and forefingers and just continue on down the line. Peel a little bit more. Until you're almost finished right here. All the way to the front or the back, whichever way. Now on this particular stencil, I had a wrap around the front here. Most stencils will cut off here and you'll just have to line up the front edge. But this is basically how easy it is to install the stencils. What you're going to end up doing is the same thing for the head and the front. It's the same process. Now, once it's down on the cabinet, everything's good, give it a good burnish, and then you're going to go find one of the ends. See which one I can get here. And you're going to get a corner of it where you can get the transfer tape off. And once you do, you slowly peel the transfer tape off to reveal the stencil. Now I find it easier to tear it and try to pull it off in sections, and I try to pull as parallel or folded back onto the stencil as possible. Don't pull up because you might rip the stencil up. So just pull completely folded back 180 on itself. And this is how you end up taking the transfer tape off. Like I said, it's better to do it in sections than it is in one big, huge, try to peel the whole cabinet in one shot. Tends to be a lot of tension on the transfer tape, and it's really tough to get it off when you're trying to do it all. See, it's getting really tough right there, so I'm going to go ahead and break this, and it makes it much easier when you tear in little pieces like this. All right, so now that we've got our first color painted, we're going to apply the second stencil or last color. Now, when I talked about the registration marks, when you get a second color that's got a nice trap and bleed, you're going to get, the second color is going to have a hole cut out that goes over the registration squares that have an X on it. So, what you'll do is you just lock this square into place like this, and then you'll come over to the other end and lock the other square in place. So you're basically getting both squares locked right underneath the two open holes. That means you have perfect registration. So once this is done and you're comfortable where everything's lined up, I'm just going to go ahead and put my weights back on so the stencil doesn't shift. And I'm going to do the same thing as I did the last time, which is cut a hinge so the stencil doesn't move. We're just going to repeat the process. Once that's burnished down, we can remove the weights. And it's basically the same as the first stencil. Flip over, slowly remove the backing, put some tension on it, and slowly peel the backing off. And like I said previously, We'll go halfway, keeping the stencil tight with some tension so it doesn't fall back on the cabinet yet. We go halfway and we grab it with our thumb and forefinger up here. Now let off slightly and let gravity be your friend. Nice even strokes. I'm overlapping about an inch as I go down the stencil. Cut off our excess and just keep moving down the line. And once again, grab a corner. Get the excess. Transfer tape. Get a corner of it peeled up here. There we go. And we start peeling the transfer tape off, pieces at a time. Like I said previous, it's easier to tear the pieces than to try to pull it in one big, huge pull, because it builds up so much tension that you can hardly get it off. Tear it right here. And there you have it. Your second stencil is installed. Tape it up, tape over your X's so you don't get any little hairline bleed through, and you're good to go, ready to paint your next color.